So people are talking about this word called compliance culture. Not only do we see it from compliance experts and businesses, we see it primarily from regulators themselves. This is what they expect of businesses nowadays, and increasingly more stakeholders are expecting this from you, such as customers and partners you work with. Unfortunately, there's a lot of noise out there about this buzzword. If you were to Google this term, you would come up with a lot of information. And then, so what I thought would be helpful is compiling all the research for you to provide you better focus on this really important concept in modern compliance programs. So we're going to talk about what compliance culture means in this webinar. We will also go over some case studies that illustrate effective and ineffective compliance programs, and then give you real ways to evaluate your own workplace to suit your organizational and professional needs. So let's get to it. Let's define what compliance culture means. And then so in its simplest form, compliance culture means behavior that naturally meets established norms. I tried to break down all the information into the simplest definition for you. And so let's explore this a little bit. So for norms, we're talking about three things. One, we're talking about external norms. So this is what we know as laws and regulations. Internal norms, this is internal policies, such as the company's code of conduct. And then increasingly, compliance is being considered like values, aspirational norms, goals, things like integrity or honesty are increasingly being considered compliance norm. Know that regulators focus more on the external side, whereas many more people focus on the latter too. And then when I say naturally, I'm talking about, people are making decisions in the moment, and they're making ethical, good decisions without pausing to reference laws or policy. It's already ingrained in what they're doing and thinking. And so that is the definition: behavior that naturally meets established norms. And so with this, through this presentation, you want to think about how you can create your own culture of compliance. And there's a few reasons for this, is that there's just so many different business cultures, industries, business goals that companies have, that there's really no one size fits all. So this notion of one single type of a compliance culture is really overly simplistic. And that was a big issue I had with the literature out there. They really prescribe very specific things for companies. And I didn't think that would always be applicable to you. But the good news is we're going to provide you different ways to evaluate your workplace in that way. And so we're going to go through 6 ways to do that. And then before we do that, however, I wanted to start out with a case study. And so Nortech was a company, is a company in North America, and they had a subsidiary in China. And their senior management and employees in the Chinese subsidiary engaged in bribery acts. They were giving money to secure business advantages in violation of Nortech's, policy, and also in violation of U.S. law, according to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. And so this was going on, and somebody in the company found out, and then they blew the whistle to headquarters, and they engaged in an internal investigation. They acted immediately, and they self-reported to the SEC. So the SEC didn't find out until the company told them. So I'm going to reference back to this case study to provide some context for the topics we go over today. So the first factor we're talking about is tone from the top. This is absolutely critical in developing any effective compliance program. There's really 3 things to look at here. First, the attitude from senior management, not just the C-suite or executives, but also senior management, and their real attitude towards compliance. There's some that really don't care about it at all, and they just want to pursue business goals, and that's pretty rare. We don't see that a lot, but it does exist. Sort of the next phase is, really caring about not getting sued. Do whatever you want, just don't have an investigation come from the SEC, for example. And then the latter is, senior management that really believe values are important, not just complying with the law, but achieving business goals and following policy. Another factor that shows a tone from the top is like developing policies themselves. So if there's an anti-corruption policy or an ability for people to report about issues, these are institutional ways that leadership has shown that they're committed to compliance. And then finally, action. Are they giving management sufficient resources to do their job? Are they putting their money where their mouth is? And so from the case study, we saw that Nortech had policies. They had an anti-bribery policy. They also had policies about expense reports, yet still the same, a senior director of the company was violating the law, and nobody, it appears that it's arguable that nobody was monitoring that conduct and seeing what was going on and investigating further, right? And so it's arguable that there was a tone from the top from headquarters, but the sense of action and applying resources in this act of monitoring is arguably lacking, or at least according to the SEC. Second is management. While having a tone from the top is critical, this is where I think people really see it happening with compliance culture. Management is really the linchpin to your compliance program. And there are 4 things a manager must do. One is they need to take compliance seriously. It's not one of those issues to, roll your eyes and think, oh, we have to do this type of training. It sets a bad example. Legitimacy, which is a factor in a culture of compliance, and we will get to that. And finally, management needs to know what's going on with the people they supervise. And so I think really in the simplest terms, like employees are going to follow the lead of their bosses. So if the bosses take compliance seriously, the employees are far more likely to take it seriously too. However, if managers don't, the employees aren't going to. It's really as simple as that. That's what we're talking about in setting a good example. And so you have to be really sure that management is setting that good example and following policies and providing tangible, positive ways for employees to see that. And so from the Nortech case, here we see, a senior director and managers, engaging in illegal acts and violating policy, right? That's a bad influence on employees. There's no wonder that employees under them engaged in the same conduct, right? Because they set that tone. A third factor is daily practices. And what we're talking about here is really the internal aspects of an organization. What type of behavior is appropriate and expected in the work environment as employees communicate with their managers and their peers? Also job tasks. What is their day-to-day? Are tasks achieving business goals and values and compliance standards that you have set up? And then the second half is really how people act as human beings. Are they under a lot of pressure to succeed? Are there sales quotas, and are they being threatened their livelihood if they don't meet certain metrics, right? These are pressures that really impact human beings and make them really less likely to want to be compliant or follow company culture. And then in the same thread, really thinking about people's needs. I mean, if somebody feels they're not being paid the correct wage and they don't feel support from the organization, or they're not getting benefits when they think they should be, they're not going to be thinking about how to achieve a company's business goals or compliance program, right? Because their needs aren't being met as a human being. So these are things to really look at. And sometimes it's difficult to monitor such fine detail, but again, that's why the management role is so critical in that regard. From the Nortech case, an example of a daily practice was really controls on expense reports and what types of books and records the Chinese subsidiary was keeping. It was something that was happening day to day, and it was impacting compliance. The fourth factor is legitimacy. I brought this up when talking about management. And the literature is really amazingly consistent on this point. It's good when employees see, to establish legitimacy, there's fair and reliable procedures. And to get to that point, you need company values to match employee values. Employees have to believe the company they're working for. And so this is often critical in hiring, as in when you are looking to hire people, in addition to a job description, espousing the cultural values of what keeps your company together is critically important, because it'll allow you to find people that match your values as you grow and become a successful business, or really continue to be a successful business. Again, we see management upholding their duties as role models for the organization. And then finally, real stories of success within the company. This creates legitimacy. And so an example I always think of is Nordstrom, the retailer. They have that story of a man tried to return a tire to a sales clerk, and Nordstrom didn't sell tires, but of course the customer rep gave him a refund anyway, right? And they often use that story to talk about one of their core values of great customer service. And so that's what we're talking about. These are stories and narratives that employees can get behind. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Let me go back. On the other side, though, it's really bad when there are two things happening. Management making exceptions to the rules with no explanation. We can see this in favoritism among some employees, but not in others. And employees really notice this. It's almost as if they have a sixth sense when something's not adding up. They want to believe in the rules, and so if exceptions are being made, they're going to believe less in rules and policies, and therefore really external norms like laws and regulations. And then also, anytime an employee violates, your code or values, and there's no consequence, it sets the same message again. It's basically the organization saying, yes, we have these policies, but we don't follow them. And if that's the case, employees are not going to follow them as well. And then ethics. So this is really trending, as I talked about earlier about this concept of compliance. Ethics is entering the compliance field. And it's incorporating really values into traditional programs. It's really about behavior. Are the values recognized by the company leading to positive behavior? And that positive behavior, in effect, is going to lead to compliance. And so it's important, and this is the gold standard, is to align individual values, what employees believe, with company values, and then external values, right? Making sure that those comply with the law. And it's almost like aligning these three chakras together. And that's like the perfect compliance culture, and arguably a gold standard. And not everybody is there yet, and that's okay. That's the goal to meet, to where you can achieve business goals and promote your values, and at the same time, that's being compliant with outside laws. Another part of ethics, it's really key, and the literature talks about employees feeling safe to come forward when they see a violation of code of conduct or a violation of values that they think is wrong. This concept of doing the right thing. And this is important because the Blount study, I have resources at the end of the slide I'll show you. There's a study done, and they found that the more egregious the conduct was happening in the organization, the worse it was less likely that an employee was going to report it, which is a wild assertion. The worse it is, the less you're going to know about it as a leader of your company. And if management is involved, that chance is even less likely. Again, underscoring the importance of management in developing a compliance culture. And so employees need to be able to talk to human resources, to compliance officers, and feel safe in doing so. Because if they don't feel safe, they're going to likely blow the whistle and talk to external regulators, right? And so a company won't have the chance to solve a problem before it becomes really messy. And so that's why it's important to really compel employees to come forward. And then the sixth factor, and this is the final factor, is training. And so in full disclosure, we're an online compliance training company, and I'm really proud of the training we do. But these are takeaways you can take with you when you evaluate any training program. And so I urge you to do that. And again, resources are at the end of the presentation for you. So factors that are good, things to look for, is that it's adapted for the adult learner. You know, there's two things that are important. Tone. Are you not talking down to them? Are you talking to them in a language they're going to understand? And then a second aspect is a practical application. Adult learners, when they do a training, they want to be able to take away certain aspects that they can use immediately in their jobs. There's a practical aspect to training. Second, the research shows that behavior modeling and compliance, a mix of that is important. Because if it was just compliance and you're focusing on external norms, you know, that there's a big disconnect between external laws and regulations and how employees behave and what their behavior shows and what their conduct does. And so if your training can incorporate behavior, it's going to really, the information is more applicable when it does that. And in the same lens, case-based learning. You know, research shows that when you can use case studies that people can identify with and empathize with, it provides context for the larger compliance issues or if training about your code of conduct. It's critically important for the adult learner. You know, bad aspects of training, you know, anything that's just an abject summary of law, if it's just a summary, even a good one, of laws without anything more. I mean, research has shown time and time again it's simply not effective as a training mechanism. People don't model their behavior after it. It's very abstract. And then another important thing is, you know, if training is rolled out with really no context to management, if it's not part of a larger system, that's an issue. Again, the manager, you know, rolling his or her eyes and saying, well, we have to do this, setting a bad tone. If employees think it's a burden, then they're not going to learn much from it, even though the concepts can be critically important. And then finally, I think beware of anybody who says training is a cure-all, that, you know, a 20-minute module is going to instantly improve the behavior of employees, right? Like that's not true. Good training will give people tools to enable them to do that. But I think any claim that it's a cure-all is oversimplified, and that's something to look out for. So I wanted to do another case study, so Airbnb. And what I like about this is, you know, it's a company that has been in the news and been criticized in the past for discrimination that has happened in their housing networks. For those of you who don't know, Airbnb is a tech company that has a huge network of housing options that people can stay at other people's homes. And I'm not going to go through the entire report, but there is this big report that was done, basically an audit of what the company did and what they're trying to do to solve these allegations of discrimination and bias that was happening in their network. And so you can click on this when you get copies of the slide, and I really urge you to look at it because it provides tangible examples of what people can do to build this compliance culture. And they track the material we've addressed today. I wanted to highlight a few things. So an example of tone from the top was the CEO being really public about this, saying he thinks compliance is important and fighting discrimination is important. And he's rolling and putting a lot of money and resources into making sure that happens. So that's what regulators and stakeholders want to see when developing a tone from the top. That's a great example of that. And then another is, you know, this concept of ethics. You know, they have this community commitment. And what I like about this, it goes beyond a simple EEO policy and brings in values. And so they talk about belonging, and they talk about respect and not judging or using bias, right? These are higher values that people can understand and get behind. I think that's important in developing a narrative and making your compliance program something employees can believe in. If they believe in it and if they believe in management, they will more likely be compliant and want to do that to promote your organization. So I think I'm going to summarize. There's a lot of information in this program, and again, the slides are going to be available after, so you can reference them anytime you hear this culture of compliance from regulators. And so first is talking about a definition, this concept of natural compliance, effortless compliance with external laws, internal policy, and broader values, ethical values. The goal is to create your own culture. These things are intrinsic to your business, and using the 6 factors will give it to you. If I can help, if any of you want to know instant things you can do right now to develop a compliance culture, it's really starting with management and legitimacy, those 2 topics, because management has a huge role in setting a good example. And if they are not setting that example of following your code and your policies, employees won't either. And the compliance program will break down pretty quickly. And so employees need to believe in your code and policies. And then so doing an audit and seeing what is happening with management is something you can do right now to develop that, if that's helpful for you. And then finally, we talked about ethics and training. Again, looking through case-based studies, anything to provide context to the training you roll out. And then increasingly, it's values-based behavior. We want to promote good behavior, and by promoting good behavior in of itself, and if you align it correctly, you will automatically be compliant with external laws. So these are the sources. I urge you to please reference back to them, and I also wanted to provide these to make sure that we were basing these things on objective evidence, and that these are things you can trust. And throughout this presentation, particularly at the top 2, talk about training values. And then one last thing, I wanted to talk about the LawRoom blog. And so this is something that you can go on right now, and it's completely free. And we develop content every week about issues in compliance, about anti-corruption, and sexual harassment and data security. And we've particularly written about culture and compliance. And so you can go ahead and you can find these links and click on them when you get the slides to read further about this concept, as half an hour is really quite a short amount of time to talk about it. But hopefully you have gotten some good takeaways, things you can use in your business, because again, this is not just a buzzword. I think we're going to see culture of compliance used a lot in the near future. And so being ahead of the game is going to be absolutely critical for you all. And so I want to thank you so much. It's such a privilege and an honor to have people join this webinar and learn this concept from me. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Douglas. I got to say, I was looking at the attendees, and you haven't lost pretty much anybody throughout the presentation. I don't see that very often, so I think you did a tremendous job there. We're going to make the slides available in a minute. I just wanted to say, I think that was great. I'm sure a lot of our attendees today will be able to appreciate the technical nuances that surround this concept that you've articulated very, very well. I'm really happy that we chose this topic. To all our attendees, I wanted to say that aside from getting the slides in a minute, we'll also be mailing out the recording of this event as usual, and we'll include a couple of follow-up items. You will have plenty of resources in the slides. As you've seen, Douglas has embedded a lot of them, but we'll also add something else in the follow-up email for you to enjoy and take value from. Lastly, I wanted to remind everybody that LawRoom, as Douglas pointed out briefly, does provide a comprehensive suite of training courses in the field of ethics. And we find that these help organizations develop a culture of compliance in the workplace. And we've been doing so successfully for a number of companies. These companies include Airbnb that we cited. And we love citing Airbnb not only because they're our clients, but because we really like the way they think about training and they think about developing a culture in the workplace within their organization. And I think it's perfectly aligned with the mission we have as an education company. So that being said, if you'd like to receive a demo of our courses and of our online training platform, if you could please just type demo in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen to let us know you're interested, then we'll have one of our training experts reach out to you and show you around. So right-hand side of your screen, if you type demo now, we'll be reaching out to you. So you having trouble making the slides available? Give us a second so we can let you all have the deck. Okay, so we're having trouble making the slides available through the webinar platform, so we will be adding them to the follow-up email you will all be receiving. We've had quite a few questions about slides, so no worries, the deck will be in the follow-up email with the recording, so you have everything in one place. Now that I'd say we're very on time here, the actual presentation is over, but as we promised at the beginning, we wanted to set aside a little bit of time for some questions, Douglas. I've been looking here at the chatter box, and there have been a few questions. I've actually picked two that I think are very interesting that I would like to ask you. We'll just do two because I don't want to go too much over the time.
Okay.
I know folks are already logging off because this was a 30-minute event. But I think a very great question that came up here was, can training really impact behavior when it comes to a topic such as ethics? So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah. Training, it's possible for training to do that. Again, as I said, it's necessary but not always sufficient by itself. Again, I think training that talks about case studies where users can employ empathy, they can explore concepts, and provide context to them, then yes, I mean, it's more likely that their behavior is going to be altered or modeled based on that, as opposed to just strict black and white law. I do. Okay. And also incorporated in a larger compliance program. I think that's a critical aspect of training.
Yeah, Douglas, and if I can add to that, I think as a training and compliance company, we've seen this over and over. One of the biggest challenges in what we do every day, especially your team when they design our courses, is that it's not enough. And you said this in the presentation, and I thought it was completely spot on. It's not enough to inform people about what the rules are, but you really have to empower them to recognize the red flags on the workplace and also have the tools to address them in a way that diffuses situations rather than, kind of causes bigger problems. So training can definitely do that, but it needs to be the right kind of training. So thank you very much. That was a great answer. Another question for you, and I think this is it's a key question for those of you out there who are trying to right now to develop a program and take these topics seriously. So who should be responsible within an organization for starting a compliance culture?
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's something that we didn't include in the presentation, mainly because it's important for a compliance program, but I thought it really complicated issues when talking about compliance culture. But it's a great question. I think there's really two main things. It really starts with senior leaders making compliance a priority and giving resources to the people below them to actually implement it. And so really it comes down to compliance officers and the CEO to effectuate this training. They're the ones perfectly, when they have the resources, they can go ahead and do this. But, I honestly think that HR professionals can do the same thing. HR professionals have to make sure that employees are following internal codes, and there's no sexual harassment and that it's being followed. And they receive complaints from employees, and so I think that's a really critical role as well in the absence of leadership or compliance officers. They can really follow this rubric of developing a compliance culture, and they're going to see benefits.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. There have been a few more questions, but I think we can agree we'll get back to folks on them on an individual basis.
Sure. Yes, I can.
Out of time right now, but for those of you who are still with us, thank you so much for being with us today and for being engaged in these topics. We hope you enjoyed the event. We certainly did enjoy preparing it and running it today. I encourage you to stay tuned with us for future webinars, because particularly if you like today's topic, because we plan to address this area of compliance in greater details in the months to come. But thank you very much. This has been a great presentation, a great day. We look forward to having you live with us again here at LawRoom. Thank you.